Recent allegations of money from state-owned entities being used to fund the ruling party bring to the fore the question as to whether Political Funding Party Act will succeed in regulating this practice. Last week, for example, former chief executive of the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa, or Prasa, Lucky Montana, implicated former ANC Treasurer General Dr. Zweli Mkhize in providing account numbers where monies were deposited to benefit the ruling party. Now, these fundraising accounts are apparently linked to the infamous 3.5 billion rand toll trains contract. Mkhize, who, as we know, is currently the Minister of Health, refuted these claims, saying he had submitted an affidavit to the Public Enterprise Portfolio Committee in 2018. Let's discuss this with Professor Somadoda Fikeni. Prof, great to have you. Thanks for being our guest.
Thank you for inviting me.
How easy is it to ensure that a company that does business with a state, for example, does not automatically benefit because they have contributed money to the ruling party?
It is not easy at all, because over the years that has been the business funding model for the political parties, and there's been no regulation or clarity in terms of how business and politics are actually relating on the issue of fundraising. And that in itself has created an inbuilt corruptible system, precisely because if you could get a tender and then give back to government or the ruling party, then that particular relationship already gives you some competitive advantage. And at times it may no longer even be the question of how capable, how competent the company is, but how willing it is going to donate back to the party.
And the thing is that, I mean, everything that you're saying, obviously for national, could and should be applied to provincial government, that is perhaps also governed by an opposition party.
That is actually the case. That's why I say, if we do exclusive focus on the ruling party, my examination when I look at the opposition party and some of the individuals, like was the case in Tshwane, you started seeing exactly the same pattern. And you saw with, Bobane, the allegations in Nelson Mandela Bay Metro. You heard Patricia de Lille talking about the same things in Cape Town. So it looks like the same problem applies to a certain degree with the opposition parties who are ruling elsewhere. So the problem might just be broader, and it's the entire political class, and it's the entire relationship between business and politics. Hence, to say that only elections to change party A or party B would not solve the problem, it ought to go right to the bottom.
Now, I mean, if you give Tshwane as an example, let's have a look at somewhere like the Eastern Cape. I mean, the state receiving money from businessmen for the asbestos case accused Edwin Sodi, but two CEOs of state entities alleging that Mkhize asked for money to fund ANC events. Would these be just coincidences that have actually no substance?
Well, I do think that they may have substance. The circumstances may differ. Remember that even the Hitachi, which was doing one of the power plants, had some link to the Chancellor House, which is the funding arm or the investment arm of the ANC. And right across, you begin to see that the lobby groups, even the tenderpreneurs of late, whenever they wanted funding, they would then bring themselves closer to the ANC. The other troubling aspect in this, if you take Sodi's account and others, it's how these monies sometimes are not even put into the ANC's own accounts, but they are put in the accounts of individuals as a donation to the ANC, with absolutely no verification as to whether such monies finally arrived in the ANC account as they are, or whether a portion of it would have been left behind as a facilitation fee. And also there are tax implications in this as well. So it's a slippery slope that simply needs regulation, as simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, if we look, if both statements made by the then Prasa head and the PIC CEO are anything to go by, doesn't this raise questions about much of the funds from state coffers, and they have been sourced by the ANC to fund its projects?
There is no doubt that you may have that, at least from the circumstantial evidence. And the problem is the people in government and some of the political deployees, even as DGs and in some of the positions, happen to also belong to the party. So you will have the whole chain that could possibly influence the funding in the direction of the very same government that has to take decisions. And it raised yet another question. Are some of these projects taken because they are necessary to the nation, or because they will provide opportunities for the funding of the party, even if some of them may become white elephants? And also the question of some of these projects having started, as would be the case with average projects, being 1 billion, by the time it is finished, it has escalated to 14 billion. So here you may have an inbuilt corruption, which might be perceived as a normal way of fundraising for the parties. That's why it may not even be cured by criminal investigations and chasing after this amount or that amount, but rather the most important thing is how to drain the swamp, how to change the laws to make sure that these things do not happen in future, irrespective of which party comes to the fore.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about going forward, but I mean, let's keep looking back, because there's just so many instances of these allegations and issues of kickbacks related to. I mean, let's bring into focus now the arms deal. I mean, the Seriti Commission report has since been disputed. Where does this leave accountability at all?
Well, what seemed to have happened when you have patronage system developing into a patrimonial state where patronage itself becomes a normal transaction of doing things, you begin to see the weakening of institutions, the deployment of wrong people. And once institutions are weakened, then institutions only depend on this one strong man or strong woman who has been deployed. And they override literally any regulatory framework. No wonder then corruption has been so rife in the country, and no wonder you do have a situation where we have what is acclaimed as the best constitution and sometimes even best governance and audit frameworks, but continuing to see corruption, because it has now become the social fabric of statecraft and the social fabric of the private sector, public sector relationship, which is insidious.
You know, this obviously begs the question as to how much contribution in the collapse suffered by SOHs has actually been inflicted by these alleged ruling party funding initiatives. I mean, could this, in your opinion, be the reason why it becomes imperative to deploy ANC comrades into these entities?
That is one of the reasons, mindful of the fact that deployment politically occurs throughout the world.
Yeah.
But that deployment is very limited. But in South Africa, the scale of deployment started fusing the ruling party and the government. And that's where the problem is. When the ruling party itself started having factional battles, it meant that even the most capable of its members could be elbowed out because they belong to the wrong faction. So you have the lowest common denominator where some of the weakest people are deployed because they can never recover from the permanent shock of being deployed, as they were not fit for purpose. So what do? They go in and become the most loyal in extracting resources and giving them to the faction or to the party, because they know that is the only security they have to continue their existence. And what also happens, because they are not capable, the first thing they have to do is to chase away all professional people, precisely because they'll try to remind them, they'll try to have professional pride, and this will be seen as insubordination. So it goes, then you have a patronage system that cripples the very state-owned companies. And the other area that becomes the most immediate victim of, corruption in SOEs, as you might have seen, is the money for maintenance. Precisely because you do not see immediately in the first few years the damage when you do not maintain these entities. That's the money that is easy for the taking.
Yeah, and this is, I think what you're doing is painting an unfortunate picture of most of the SOEs in South Africa is just the degradation of every single one of them, and this is one of the biggest issues. And I mean, let's just kind of round this up and bring it to just Friday. I mean, judging from the statements uttered on Friday, where this was outside of the court, where SG Ace Magashule was appearing, Tony Yengeni basically said he is going nowhere. He's going to finish his term. My question, is there any appreciation of the depth of corruption and the will to actually deal with it within the ANC?
Well, I do think that the key performance area of the ANC at the moment is who will win the soul of the ANC in the factional battle. That you have national interest, you have 58 million people, it is way further down in the priority of the ANC, and such a divided leadership busy fighting desperately cannot have any strategic thinking and conversation about the future, because it is about, will I survive tomorrow? Even worse when some of them are facing court challenges and criminal incidents. It is for that reason that some of them choose the issue of ideology and sometimes politicize and weaponize any criminal case they are facing. Hence, you hear some saying the main important thing is radical economic transformation and instead of the criminal cases. And we should be reminded here that Silva da Lula in Brazil brought most radical changes in a space of 10 years in the Lula moment. But once found to have committed a crime in terms of corruption, he was put in prison. There is no contradiction in a person at a certain point doing a good job and at a certain point committing corruption. Doing a good job is not an immunity to be corrupt.
I ask you this then, even if the ANC won't on its own admit to its role in the malfunctioning of state-owned entities and the state of some of these SOEs, I mean, do you think there would be a shred of conscious or self-introspection? And I ask this in the light of these by-elections that we just saw. All of this is taking place, and why should they change when the voter is still giving them the vote? Would that not be what's going through their mind as well? Just saying, well, look, whatever we're doing is working because people just keep voting for us, so we can keep doing what we do.
Yes, in the short term, one with a short-sightedness may actually think that. But if we come to think of it, that the low participation, even by people who are eligible voters, to a point where 60% at times doesn't even bother to participate in these. Where do they participate? In social media, in the protests, in the streets. It means the entire political system has a legitimacy crisis. Even if you were to say you have won 60% of the 20% that participated, you already have a system that has made people to be disinterested generally. But not only that, you have seen that unlike in many African countries which have a huge rural base, that if you lose to the urban voters in big ways, as it almost happened in the previous elections and as it happened in the local government elections in 2016, any party that is ruling will lose power because the urban-based voters are the most, likely to swing or likely to protest because most of the time they are facing all kinds of swings and changes, the levies, the municipal bills and so forth. And it is very easy for them to feel the pinch of the failures of the state. So to that extent, I do think that it might be cold comfort to them. And one more internal ANC battle like the Polokwane one, ANC will certainly lose power by any projection, because if they have another battle, whoever wins now will just become a member of the main opposition.
Prof, I need to wrap with you, but I'm going to throw you into our question of the day, which is basically getting viewers' opinions on what happened with the Bushiris over the weekend and, you know, what actually happened there. Let's wrap it up, if you don't mind, giving us your views in like 30 seconds, because we're going to see some of our viewers as well and what they've had to say, but we'd love to hear from you too.
If anyone ever wanted to see the effect of the erosion of statecraft through corruption over the years, this is the most dramatic illustration, where it says, in the most unequal society in the world, if you have money, you can buy justice, you can buy anything, you can buy your IDs, your work permits and everything else, and keep justice at bay. And secondly, it says something about our oversupply of democracy, where we think we're still within a democratic realm, when we are actually dithering towards anarchy, where everybody who wants to do anything comes to South Africa and it's immunized, and within South Africa itself, then you wonder why we have such high crime rate, high corruption and so forth. This is it. It is demonstrating that we need an overhaul, not just tinkering with the edges of our system. We're becoming a laughingstock of the world as not being serious. Remember, it's not just this one case. A translator for heads of states who came for Nelson Mandela funeral was a person who admitted that I was unwell and I didn't know sign language, maybe was doing some martial art next to them. Who will ever trust that system thereafter? And you also had the Guptas landing in the space where heads of states are landing. You also had the Guptas escaping when we knew they would escape. You had Grace Mugabe, the Bushir, I mean, the series and so forth. So
too many examples, Prof. Too many examples. I got to wrap you. I've got to stop you there. But thank you. Thanks for talking to us. Somadoda Fikeni, always giving us some great analysis here. Political analyst discussing some of the recent allegations of SOE money used to fund the ANC and also views on the Bushiris leaving the country. We've got to say goodbye to SABC viewers. Prof, thanks again. And we'll see you again bright and early.